Hello, want to welcome you to the podcast here. We have Chris Luecke with us. He is the founder of the Manufacturing Happy Hour podcast. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Great to be here, Lee. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of want to jump in and really start with kind of talking about your background. As we were discussing earlier, you grew up in St. Louis, which is where we're located, so had some good stories about kind of where you grew up, local sports teams, things like that. But kind of want to let you give us a little background on, your journey of where you got today and kind of stops along the way with different companies and kind of what led you into this, this manufacturing focused line of work. So I'll kind of turn it over to you for a little bit.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I wish I could start more podcasts just riffing about the latest happenings with the St. Louis Blues, but
Right.
we already did that off camera today, so
Yeah.
we'll save our audience that part of the story. But yeah, there were a few questions there about how Manufacturing Happy Hour came to be, what the career journey looked like leading up to there. I'll start off with, let's say, the first part of that, right? What is Manufacturing Happy Hour for the audience? And then we'll get into kind of the journey that led there. So Manufacturing Happy Hour, as I describe it, is a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast. It is a weekly show, primarily a one-on-one interview-based show where I speak to leaders across the manufacturing industry to really understand the latest trends and technologies, and most importantly, the actions they're taking to implement those technologies or take their business to the next level so other manufacturing leaders can learn from that. Now, a good portion of the audience is based in North America, but as the show has grown over the time, I literally just came back from Europe learning from, hey, what are manufacturers doing over in places like Germany to be successful? So really
Mm-hmm.
one of the common threads of the show that has evolved is that I'm going to different places, exploring what manufacturing means to the local community, the local culture, etc., and trying to help manufacturers learn from, hey, what's working in Pittsburgh, for example, or what's working in a place like central Nebraska, right? We go to rural and urban areas,
Right.
what's working in Germany. And it's really meant to be a way that folks can learn from other manufacturers in different parts of the world and find ways to take those tips, the things that are working there, and apply them to their business as well. And during that time, Manufacturing Happy Hours evolved into more than a podcast. At the end of the day, it's a community of listeners and leaders that listen to the show. And one of the nice aspects of having a show called Manufacturing Happy Hour is I don't have to change the brand or the name at all if I'm throwing a party at a trade show, for example, right?
Right.
It translates very well to being an event platform also.
Yeah. 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 Well, definitely want to kind of dive into some of those things that you just touched on as far as, differences between markets within the U.S., but also the U.S. versus other countries. But kind of backing up a little bit, kind of tell us a little bit about your background. You joined Rockwell Automation. That was your first job out of college. Maybe kind of walk us through some of the roles you had there. And I'm guessing that some of those roles has kind of led you to where you are today with Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Yeah, actually, the different roles I did and the way they evolved really played into why and how Manufacturing Happy Hour got started. So I'll even go back one more step before the Rockwell days. So talked about how I'm from St. Louis and things like that. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So that's where the Rockwell connection started. That's a Milwaukee-based company. But my
Okay.
first true engineering job, I was studying to be a mechanical engineer, was with Anheuser-Busch. I did my
Oh,
co-op with Budweiser in St. Louis, kind of alternating school and work. Pretty common thing for engineering majors to do where they go to school for 4.5 years or 5 years, but they take semesters off to work in an intro engineering role at different companies.
okay.
So my
Nice.
first role was with Metal Container Corporation, so the aluminum can making side of the business, but based on the fact that I run a company now called Manufacturing Happy Hour, I think it's very appropriate that my first
Yeah.
role was being with one of the largest beer companies in the world. So,
Yeah.
uh, it,
Nice. I didn't know that.
yeah,
That's cool.
it was cool to cut my teeth as an engineer there, but I think as time evolved, like when I was in college, I was running a radio show and things like that. I was doing a lot of other non-engineer type things. So when it came time to go into the real world, my first job ended up being with Rockwell Automation as a salesperson there, and I think that was a great way to start my career. I've always been gravitated towards promotions, sales, and marketing, essentially. So I took my technical prowess and was able to turn it into a role where I was really helping communicate the value of what automation could bring to an organization. And as a salesperson for Rockwell, I worked in two different markets. First was down in Houston, Texas for the first 4 years of my career, and then out in the San Francisco Bay Area serving the semiconductor high-tech industry during the next 5 years of my career. And that's really where Manufacturing Happy Hour got started. I was moving from a market, Houston, Texas, that was very relationship-based. A lot of folks that had been at their companies working in the chemical and oil and gas industry for 20, 30 plus years and things like that. So relationships important, in-person meetings were important. Fast forward 4 years and I moved to the Bay Area, and we all have our visions of what the tech scene is like in San Francisco. And a lot of that's true. You have you have individuals that work for a company for, a year, 2, 3 years, and then they jump to the next spot. So I needed a new way to reach in my audience of decision makers. And by the way, that set of decision makers was younger. So I was thinking to myself, I was in my 20s at the time. It's like, how do I consume content? Well, I do it through podcasts and videos. So cracked myself a beer on a Saturday afternoon, recorded a little video on my iPhone, sent it to some of my mentors and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we went beyond the buzzwords and just started talking about manufacturing and automation as if we're having a beer with one another? And Manufacturing Happy Hour really started as a campy video series that I was just recording on a smartphone for the first 3 years. And eventually it evolved into what I described it as today, which is a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast. I went from doing 3 to 5 minute, almost little commercials, if you will, where we were drinking a beer talking about automation, to longer conversations, 40, 50, 60-minute long discussions with manufacturing leaders where we could really get into the nuts and bolts of what made them tick and what allowed their businesses to succeed. Yeah. So the evolution of my customer base was what really brought on Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So when you were doing that, though, when you started you were with Rockwell, and it was really just a way to kind of get your name out there, break the ice, maybe get a foot in the door with, customers to kind of open the door and have a conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other thing I would say is, like, I was younger at that point, right? So I was a newbie to the industry at that point. Like, really, when you're in your 20s, early 30s, right, you're still relatively new to the workforce in the grand scheme of things. So sure. I was using it as a way to learn and build credibility. Now, having done this for almost 10 years, I think I've built up some of that credibility. Now I know a thing or two about the industry, but when I talk to folks about starting a podcast and things like that, it's like, hey, if you're in a niche and you're young, like, this is your excuse to meet people and learn about the industry. And that's what I was using it as. And I still use it as that to this day. Like, I'm learning something new with every interview that I do, but especially when you're green to the space that you're entering and you're working in. I mean, it was a tremendous way to build some rapport and relationships in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you first started with Rockwell, did you envision that you were going to kind of take on a sales role, or did you have something else in mind when you came out of college and, mechanical engineer?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite frank, I mean, I graduated in 2009, so the economy was at a pretty rough spot at that point. And I had the good fortune of interning in a quality role at Rockwell prior to that. So, I'd gotten wind of their sales training program, great program. I mean, what a great way to just get ramped up into the field you're going into. I interviewed for that probably in November of 2009, and I was graduating shortly after, but the training program wasn't going to start until July of 2010. So
Oh,
when I got that job, when I got that offer, I'm like, well, that's pretty sweet, because I'm looking around at a lot of my friends that didn't have anything going for them at that point.
tough
Let
market.
alone that gave me the opportunity to have like 6 months off of school where I got to travel around Europe a bit before I started
Oh,
my full-time
nice.
job. So never got to study abroad, but I did a cool backpacking trip after after I graduated from college. So
Oh,
I
nice.
was
Where'd you go?
I mean, that was a whole jaunt around Western Europe. I've since gone back to Europe and done like Eastern Europe and things like that. But basically, yeah, I didn't travel for the whole 6 months. I was over there for closer to like 3 months, but flew over, went into Rome, kind of did a loop around Italy, Spain, France, the Benelux countries, went down through Germany to Switzerland, and then flew up to the Isles. So got to experience England, Ireland, and Scotland after that.
Wow.
So a great initial sampling. If I could give advice to someone coming out of college or someone that's in their 20s, like do some of that traveling when you're young, because
Yeah.
I still travel quite a bit like that. You know, I was mentioning I was just over in Germany for manufacturing happy hour, went up to explore Norway for a little bit after that.
Oh, nice.
But there's a different style of travel in your late 30s than there is in your early 20s. Like it's, you
Right.
know, you got more energy, you can stay out late with the folks you meet in hostels, you meet people from around the world. It was a very cool experience to have
Yeah.
at that age.
And so when you did that trip, was that just, I mean, I'm guessing it wasn't a very structured trip. It was just kind of a, go where I'm going to go and, find a place last minute to sleep kind of thing.
A little bit. I mean, Lee, I'm an engineer, so I need some structure and I plan things ahead. Like, I kind of knew what the general route was going to be. I knew there was a concert festival in England that I was going to go to during that trip. So I had some guardrails to that trip, but I went over, I think, with my first like week and a half of hostels and train rides booked. And then, the nice thing is you can, once you're over in Europe, you can kind of go anywhere, right? Like you can
Right.
hop on a train, a
Yeah.
Ryanair flight, and get wherever you need to go pretty cheaply. So I kept it a little more flexible after that, but I still had some spots like in the trip where I knew I had to be. Like I knew when my return flight from London was. So there was a point
You had
A
that.
and a point
Right.
B that I needed to get to. But yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And that is, you're right. I mean, to have that kind of that little gap there with the safety net, knowing there's a job waiting for me when I get back. That's a pretty cool thing to have. And like you said, I mean, some of the experiences that you had, I'm sure, and people you met, stories and whatnot. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, let's tie it back into manufacturing happy hour really quickly. Like that, those type of experiences when you're younger shape the things you do when you're later in your career. Like I did write a blog post back in like 2016 or something titled "How Long-Term International Travel Makes You a Better Business Person." But even today, like manufacturing happy hour, like we've talked about, I'm going all around the world now to figure out what is working for manufacturers in different regions. And had I not been bitten by that travel bug earlier on, I might not be taking the same approach to my podcast that I am
Sure.
today.
Yeah.
There are different ways you can go about learning what manufacturers are doing. I think part of it is my own interests and personality, but the other aspect is knowing how much you can learn when you're in a different part of the world. That has shaped the way I run manufacturing happy hour today, and why I put so much emphasis on making sure manufacturers are learning from folks that are outside the borders of their state or their country.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. It makes sense. I mean, that you have to have that willingness to kind of be open to learn best practices that may be working for someone that's in a different market, that you're not seeing those types of things in your market, but that can be a pretty big competitive advantage sometimes too.
Oh, 100%. I mean, just to put a really concrete example to it, when I was over in Germany just a couple weeks ago, one thing we see at a lot of American trade shows, for example, is individuals talking about how, we need more skilled labor. We need to improve what people's perception is of the trades. And when I was over in Germany, I made a comment to the organizers of the show afterwards. I'm like, I didn't see as much of that talk here. Like, we got to increase the prestige of manufacturing. We got to get people in the trades. And the very simple comment was, it's like, well, we've held people in those type of roles and prestige for decades. Like that never went away in Germany. So it's very cool to see how different parts of the world are emphasizing different opportunities and challenges. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from there. I mean, I think people in the United States, for example, would love the fact that people are just automatically going to the trades. They know it's a prestigious career path. They know it's a place where apprenticeships can set you up for success for decades to come. So those are the type of things that I'm always looking for, where it's like, hey, one thing that this part of the world is already doing very well is the prestige that is built around skilled trades in a part of the world where I live, where we're facing a workforce shortage of something like 2 million people over the next 10 years. Like there's something we can learn from what they're doing over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what are some of those things that you're finding that I mean, like you said, it really never, they never had those issues like we have here, but I guess, are there certain things that you're seeing that they're doing that kind of help maintain, that work environment that people aren't looking, I don't want to say looking down on those types of jobs, but I would say here in the US that definitely happens for some industries. So,
Well, I think culturally you look at it, right? German engineering, German manufacturing, like it has a reputation, not just in Germany, but around the world. That's why people go out of their way to buy Volkswagens and Audis and things like that, and Mercedes. Like that's been there forever. So there's an element of brand to it. There's also the fact that they have such a robust apprenticeship. Trying to think of what the right word for it. Like it is an established way of getting folks trained and into industry. It is an option that people know exists. I think that's part of the issue here. There are a lot of people within the U.S. that that manufacturing doesn't even cross their mind when they're in their teens or when they're in college as a career path, right? Those are the things that I think they're doing really well over there. But even let's localize this a bit more to, let's say, North America. One of the things I think people can learn when they travel to a rural area, for example, is they see how much that local manufacturing company, whether it's a more mom and pop operation that employs a couple hundred people in, let's say, central Nebraska, southern Missouri, or whether it's a massive steel plant, for example, in the middle of Ohio, like those facilities, those companies are central to the success of those regions. Like you can tell when you go into a small town whether they have like a pillar manufacturer there, like a central organization there, or if they don't, right? The vibe, the prosperity, everything about it is totally apparent. And that's something urban areas I think can learn a lot from. I've had conversations with another individual from St. Louis named Drew Crow. He does a lot of advocacy for manufacturing, not only in St. Louis, but around the country as well. We've talked about this before, that you kind of lose that focus around how manufacturing is important to a region in an urban area when you don't see the stark contrast that you do in a rural area where there's an organization that's just central to that area. You kind of think about it a little bit, right? Because everyone knows what Fortune 500s are based in their city, but you don't necessarily think about manufacturing in that same way.
Right. That's true. So what are some of the things you're seeing? You touched on this kind of apprenticeship, these programs that they have over in Europe. I mean, are you seeing some of those similar things starting to happen now in the U.S. that, is trying to kind of ease that transition for someone who maybe, they're finishing high school and instead of going to college, they have this opportunity that kind of makes that smooth transition?
I am starting to see that. I think starting is the very fair way to describe it. I do feel the dialogue around we need to get more folks into skilled trades. We need to increase the prestige of skilled trades. The way I look at it as a podcaster in the manufacturing industry, that conversation, that dialogue is now not just within the industrial circles that we speak with, but the general public is talking about it as well. You see guys like Mike Rowe, for example, from Dirty Jobs that have helped bring that type of conversation to the mainstream. I think that's a very important part of it. One of the points that I know my audience has heard me talk about recently, but for this to really catch its stride, this trend of getting folks into skilled trades jobs, what really needs to take place, and I don't know why we always seem to forget this part of it. Like 18-year-olds don't necessarily look up to a 38-year-old the same way they look up to someone that's 22, 23, 24, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see that person having a similar life experience to them. They can see themselves in that person's shoes a little bit more. I think once we start getting that next generation, I don't want to say that first generation of folks, but let's say a bunch of Gen Z people that are 22, 23, 24 into manufacturing fields, into skilled trades jobs, and the folks that they grew up with that are 5, 6 or so years younger can start seeing those individuals having success, having fulfillment in their career, enjoying what they do when they go to work, being able to purchase a house early on, not
Right.
having potentially the same amount of college debt that they've
Mm-hmm.
seen folks that have gone alternative routes, which are still very valuable, by the way. Like, I think we almost within the manufacturing industry sometimes are really on the skilled trades kick that we're starting to forget how much an engineering degree can do for you. Like, what I want to happen is I want all these paths to feel like viable, prestigious paths, right?
Sure.
For me,
Exactly.
yeah, going the engineering route was 100% the route I should have gone. Getting an engineering degree was definitely what I should have done. It plays to my strengths. It helped me develop a skill set around problem solving, and it even helped me develop my entrepreneurial edge as well. That's not to say that you can't go into skilled trades, learn the trade, learn the business, and say to yourself, gosh, I've been a CNC machinist for 5 years. I kind of know how this shop runs now. Maybe I want to move up. Maybe I want to own my own shop. Like,
Right.
I want people to see that all of those paths are viable ways to go. And I think the wonderful thing that can happen in this point in time is people can find more opportunities that play to their strengths, whether that's going the college route or whether that's going the skilled trades route.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree that should be something that's on the table when, someone who is a junior, senior in high school and they're looking at all their options, that, they have these paths that are, I don't want to say clearly defined, but they're kind of laid out for them of where they can look at where this potentially could take them. And like you said, that they have someone they're looking up to, possibly that is at 4 or 5 years older than them, and they can see, okay, if I take this path, I mean, they've bought their first house, it's a good life, and it's not kind of like looked down upon. Whereas I still feel like we're in this, and I'm sure it's different for every market, but we're in this environment where it's still like you got to go to college, you got to get that 4-year degree, or else you're not going to have a good life, and which is it's not true. But it's just not, those paths aren't laid out clearly defined of what those options are.
Yeah, I think we're right on the cusp of this change occurring because like I said, I'm seeing more of that dialogue enter the mainstream. Let's not discount the importance of seeing an Instagram account that's dedicated to skilled trades or dedicated even to things like someone that's a plumber, for example. Like, in a world where kids want to be YouTube influencers, for example, there's a way to be a tradesperson and be an influencer. And quite frankly, it's probably a better niche than just trying to be like a general influencer out there talking about Pokemon cards, for example. Like, there are a lot of technologies and tools in place, like the new social media landscape, that I think continue to get this on the radar of more and more folks. That's why I feel we're at an inflection point where things are really starting to change right now.
Yeah. No, it always amazes me. I'm a little older. I'm in my mid to upper 40s, but I'm kind of that generation where I see both sides. But even when I would see folks starting a YouTube channel and want to be an influencer, your first reaction is like, come on, like you got to get a real job. But that is just not the case. It's just not the case anymore. And like you said, whether it's someone who they're just an influencer, whether it's from trends and fashion and things like that, or to very niche type of channels, whether it's a trades thing or whatever the case may be. There's just so many different avenues and there's people just making a really, really good living doing those sorts of things. And so, like you said, I mean, I think there's just so many different options that are on the table, and hopefully we're kind of at that point where it just kind of spills over into becomes more of the norm of I can look at all these different things and let's see where my path takes me.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, but it's going to take more folks like you and me and folks that are 10, 15 years younger than us sharing these messages and making sure the folks that aren't aware of these options are aware of these options now.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of staying on the subject of your podcast with Manufacturing Happy Hour, you also have one that you started. I think you still kind of run a little bit.
Yeah.
It's called PubCast Worldwide. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
A
tell me some about that.
PubCast, yeah, PubCast to clear the air on what that is. It is a podcast recorded at a pub or a bar or a brewery. So,
I
yes,
see a
that was.
recurring theme here, Chris.
It is. It is. Well, this will actually be a lesson that I think ties into what we were just talking about because I
Yeah.
started Manufacturing Happy Hour and PubCast Worldwide at the same time. PubCast Worldwide was a podcast where I was interviewing anyone and anyone over drinks during my travels around the world. Whereas at that time, Manufacturing Happy Hour was, as I described it, a campy video series that was like 3 to 5 minute videos recorded on my iPhone. And this ties directly back into that influencer conversation we were just having. The audience I was targeting with PubCast Worldwide was too general, right? It was an excuse for me to talk to anyone and anyone over a drink at bars and breweries around the world. And it really evolved into almost like a global craft beer show, if you will. So I eventually did niche down with it. But at the same time, Manufacturing Happy Hour was growing in what I would say was a more lucrative vertical, right? Manufacturing, for examples. Manufacturers tend to have more marketing dollars than a local craft brewery does, if you will.
Right.
So if you look at the two different audiences I was targeting, what I started to see was it's like, oh, I could actually kind of build a business out of what I'm doing with Manufacturing Happy Hour, whereas doing something with a more general audience in a vertical that didn't necessarily have the same money that they could invest into getting their word out on a podcast, for example. That's why Manufacturing Happy Hour started to evolve into my main focus that it is today. Whereas right at this immediate moment, PubCast Worldwide is kind of on the back burner to an extent. But
Yeah.
I will say I loved doing PubCast Worldwide. It was a ton of fun. I got to interview punk rock bands at beer festivals in San Diego. I got to interview brewers in Japan, in Australia, in Chile. I'm probably one of the only podcasters in the world that can say I've recorded podcasts on 5 different continents. There are a lot of cool things. There are a lot of cool things that I did there, a lot of lessons that I learned that apply to my business today. But for anyone listening that is thinking of going the path of becoming a creator in some way, shape, or form, I think it does illustrate the power of picking a niche that, and let's not forget that 10 years ago, manufacturing was kind of considered a boring industry. Like it was considered dull, dark, dirty, dangerous. And quite frankly, I think the industry as a whole was not doing a good job of sharing the story of manufacturing. Like when I started doing videos in 2017, I was the only person doing videos in manufacturing. That's a bit hyperbolic, right? But I was like one of a handful of individuals that was like, wait a second, like it's cool to see how a robot works. It's cool to see how additive manufacturing works or how machining this part works. Like I was one of the first people to put that on video. And it was just, it was an opportunity to really start spreading the word about manufacturing using modern media that I had been using in the past for like travel podcasting, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Do you get a lot of people reaching out to you just asking questions about, hey, how do I go about starting something like this? What are your suggestions of how I do this?
Yeah, it's funny. Literally, the reason I was about 5 minutes late to this morning's call was I was finishing a conversation about that with another individual that had been running their podcast. And actually, he asked me the question, like, do you still recommend that folks start podcasts today? And My answer is yes, with a couple caveats, or not caveats, but a couple things you need to be aware of going into a podcast, right? First of all, it's going to be more work than you expect. When I started podcasting, certainly I'm just like, oh, it's going to be easy. We're just recording it on audio. I'll add an intro and outro, throw it on iTunes, and we're good to go, right? There's a lot of other extra work, a lot of production, a lot of preparation for these interviews that goes into it as well. So I make sure that folks that are wanting to go into it understand that it's going to be a bigger lift than you think it is. And the other thing I say, back to the lesson about PubCast worldwide versus my niche audience with manufacturing happy hour, the more you can pick a vertical, the better off you're going to be. Like, don't expect to get Joe Rogan type listenership numbers. You're not going to you're not going to be in the millions. Like, if you're a podcast that has 1,000 or even a couple hundred listeners, that's still pretty good. Like, the real value of podcasting comes from making connections and learning more about your industry and building a reputation for yourself in your vertical. I would always say, first and foremost, that is going to be your biggest ROI for starting a podcast or some sort of content series. Maybe eventually turning it into a business and getting sponsors, etc. That's totally secondary, if you will.
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, we started this, and I think it was more, like you said, it was a way for us to kind of make introductions. Sometimes it's with current customers that we have, both buyers and sellers on the Bryzos platform. But also just, we mentioned, I talked about this when we were talking before the show. Just we've had guests that have nothing to do with the metals industry, but they've been some of our kind of most commented on or most popular episodes, just hearing people's stories. And sometimes those lead to introductions. After that meeting, I'll receive an email saying, hey, love being on your show. I want to introduce you to this person. They're actually in the metals industry, and just different things like that. But to your point, it wasn't this focused, we're going to start this podcast and it's going to be a business, so to speak. It was just kind of this tangential thing that we started that really just was bringing awareness to Bryzos, kind of getting our name out there more, our personalities, getting to know us. Hey, we're just regular people, kind of, bringing you inside, behind the curtain kind of thing. But to your point, I think it kind of snowballs from there. And then I think if someone was really focused on, hey, I want to turn this into a business, those things kind of come down the line. You almost have to you have to put in the work, I would say, before things start to really happen. Not that we're focused on that, but that would be, that's what I would think would happen.
I mean, Bryzos is really like a poster child for what a B2B podcast should be. A couple of things that I heard you say there. Sometimes you're talking to partners or suppliers on the show. When people are thinking about starting their own show, I always say, hey, if you're doing an interview show, one of your target groups of guests should be people that are your customers today or people that you wish were your customers. And that latter one is so important because what's more exciting? Receiving a cold email saying, hey, this is what we do here at our company. Would you like to schedule some time to chat? Versus saying, hey, I've seen what your company is all about. I understand you have a dynamic leader as your COO, CEO. We have a podcast that targets this type of audience. Would you like to be on it, right? What a much better way of building rapport with someone that could turn into business. But the other part of that is you don't want to be like overly tactical, overly commercial. You're talking to other folks that in the industry have valuable pieces of information they can share with your audience. And as you said, just by those type of conversations, even if they're not directly related to the metals industry, depending on who knows who or what type of topic comes up that just resonates with the right person at the right time, those can still turn into business intros as well. So I love what you're doing over there, Bryzos. I think it's the right mentality and the right way to go about doing a podcast in today's modern media landscape.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, Rachel does a great job of reaching out to folks. And I mean, we've had guests on the podcast that, they started using Bryzos, for a hot minute. and she'll just reach out to them, and next thing I know, a week later, they're here in our office face to face doing a podcast,
Yeah.
and they're like, "This is so cool that we don't get to kind of share our story really ever." And so for you to reach out and extend that invitation, this is great. And then it just kind of snowballs from there, and they make introductions, and if it turns out they start using Bryzos more, great. But that wasn't that's not our focus. I think sometimes that's even better when it's like that. There's no expectation. It's like, hey, if you want to come on and talk about your business, talk about Bryzos, whatever you want to talk about, it's fine with us. It seems to kind of lead to more things down the road.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. In fact, when I get asked that question in the future of, hey, how do I start a podcast in the B2B space? I might be like, hey, check out what Bryzos is doing over there. That's a primary example.
There you go. So tell me about some of your favorite episodes, whether it's on Manufacturing Happy Hour or PubCast Worldwide. I know you never want to kind of say, hey, this was my favorite one, but maybe just some cool stories, cool guests. What can you share with us?
Yeah. Great question. And I like that you already added the disclaimer there. Before I ever answer this question, I always say it's like, hey, I've enjoyed every episode I've done. A lot of great guests, a lot of great lessons learned, a lot of nuggets in all of these different episodes. But there are some that I can say are certainly memorable. We'll start off with one that's very niche to the automation industry, if you will. There is a viral video from the 90s called the Retro Encabulator, which is if you're not familiar with it, look up Retro Encabulator. It's going to be the first video that shows up. It's a technobabble video. It's this one guy with a really dry, matter-of-fact voice talking through all these nonsense terms to describe a piece of equipment called the Retro Encabulator. So I can't remember all the terms in there, but they talk about things like side fumbling and like just nonsense words are used in there. So One time I was at a trade show and I walked by a booth and I recognized the voice. I'm like, that's the guy that does the Retro Encabulator video. So I got to interview him and kind of do like an oral history behind the scenes episode on the history of the Retro Encabulator, if you will, and how this whole viral sensation came to be. So not really an episode that manufacturing leaders would like learn a lot of things that are going to transform their business per se, but a very fun episode. So that's always a fun one to lead off on. That's episode 66 of Manufacturing Happy Hour on the Retro Encabulator. But, so some of the other ones that stick out, I was speaking with an individual named Jason T. Ray from Paperless Parts recently. He's been on the show a few times. But had a conversation with him, and we were talking about the skills gap, something we've talked about on this conversation a couple times about how do we get more people into skilled trades. And he had a very powerful line in that show saying, when we know something has been an issue for as long as it has, it's no longer a skills gap, it's a leadership gap. And I think that really puts the onus on the manufacturing leaders that listen, saying, hey, we know this is an issue, so what are we going to do about it, right? And there are, there's so many episodes in the Manufacturing Happy Hour catalog that folks have talked about what they've done to inspire the next generation, recruit and retain talent. I even have an episode 183, which is like a case study on how a small manufacturer first adopted robotics. And it ended up turning into a story on how not only did it help this company become more productive, but it helped them hire more people, and it helped them promote the people that were already within their organization as well. Like welders that started using this cobot were able to develop the skills they needed to become fabricators, right? That's a promotion. That's a higher paid job. So lessons like that, episodes like that, always stick out. And then lastly, since you asked about Manufacturing Happy Hour and PubCast Worldwide, right? Like, it's very cool to record episodes in different parts of the world, whether that's in the Czech Republic, whether that's in Australia. But one of the episodes that sticks out was I was at a beer tasting demonstration in Yokohama, Japan. And it was all in Japanese. Like, I'm there for 4 hours on an afternoon in the middle of my trip, whole thing's in Japanese. There was the individual that invited me. He spoke a little English, so he would translate for me every once in a while. He's like, hey, this is kind of what we're saying here and things like that. But, after we were done, I did a little episode with him as well. We talked about craft beer in Japan, and certainly we talked about things like in their lagers, they try to incorporate some Japanese ingredients, right? They bring in yuzu fruit, for example, which gives it a nice light citrusy flavor. But what stuck out to me in that day was it was really one of the few times in my life where I kind of had an opportunity to feel like the other, right? I was in a room, I was the only American in the room, didn't speak a lick of Japanese, and it helped me appreciate how, in many ways privileged I am to be able to go to pretty much anywhere in the world. And I know that my language is the common language across the world. And it was an experience that helped me put myself in the shoes of other folks that don't have that same privileges or don't have other privileges as well.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this has surprisingly become kind of a theme of this conversation, but there's a ton you can learn from traveling outside of your comfort zone. And that was a scenario where I was like knee deep in it the whole time. Now, it certainly helped that it was a social atmosphere where there was beer and things like that. So
Right.
even if you don't speak the same language, there are a lot of areas
You're
where
like,
you can find
another beer
common
over here,
ground.
please.
So no, it was great. But those are some of the most memorable moments from my podcasting career.
Yeah. Nice. Those were some good ones. So kind of we've hit on some topics here about shortage of labor and things like that. But what are some other like the biggest pain points, when you're talking to these manufacturing leaders, whether it's shop owners or whomever, what are some of the other major pain points that they're seeing in their day-to-day business?
Yeah. Great question. We've talked about a lot about the skills gap and finding talent. So I'm going to skip that for now
Sure.
and talk about a different challenge that we're coming across. Because I think, especially for an audience of manufacturers, it's pretty well known that that's a challenge folks are facing.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently, actually, the episode that just came out this week, episode 245, I was having a conversation with an individual named Brett Boyd. He's the CEO of Sustainment. And they've been doing a survey in partnership with the New American Industrial Alliance, NIA. And they've been speaking with mid-market manufacturers, taking a real grassroots approach to, hey, what are the challenges and needs of manufacturers in this day and age? And one of the things that surprised me about that conversation was what the number one challenge they had encountered so far in that survey. And it wasn't talent. The number one challenge was access to capital for projects, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense as well. In addition to making sure you have the right people, there are a lot of manufacturers, especially maybe ones that haven't invested in automation as much up to this point, that don't necessarily have the access or don't know how to access the dollars they need to adopt their first robot or automate for the first time. And we could go on and on about what some of the solutions are to that, right? The
Mm-hmm.
National MEP Network, Manufacturing Extension Partnership groups that often have grants and funding that local small manufacturers can take advantage of to fund some of their projects. There are a lot of different things that folks can do. But that was listed as one of the initial challenges that folks are facing, right? Access to capital or not knowing how to access the capital. And just to provide more like actionable solutions, right? One of the things that we're seeing in the manufacturing industry come up is more models of financing is the wrong word, but let's say robots as a service, for example. You can get your first robot from certain companies and leverage it from an as a service standpoint. So you're paying more out of an operations budget than you are a capital budget. So when it comes to questions of how am I going to finance, how am I going to get this new technology, more options are coming to play in that area right now. So that highlights a bit of a challenge that manufacturers are facing, and one of the solutions, or I should say a couple of the solutions, right? MEP networks, RAS models, there are new ways to go about financing some of these technologies.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the kind of like you said, out of funding and out of operations instead of capital. But it makes sense. I mean, I have to imagine that's just a major decision that especially a smaller business is trying to, kind of evaluate and decide, do we spend you know, millions of dollars to kind of upgrade equipment and different things. That's got to be a tough call for someone to make, and then not only to make that decision, but then actually execute it and come up with the capital and different things like that. So that's interesting to hear. There's some options out there like that.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, from my standpoint, it was interesting to hear that the skills gap or finding talent isn't always the first thing on people's mind as well. I
Yeah.
think we default to that a lot, especially folks that are in the industry. It's like, oh, well, of course that's going to be their number one issue. And while it often is their number one issue, or usually, very close behind, it's good to hear what some of the other challenges are and how people are overcoming them.
Yeah. And do you find, generally speaking, obviously it's going to vary customer to customer or business to business, but do you find that there's still a lot of people that are resistant to this change, that's, whether it's robotics or just technology in general within their business, their shop, or, saying I'm not resistant to the change necessarily, it's just resistant to how to implement that or how to purchase that? Like, what are you hearing mostly from these businesses?
That's a great question. One that I was kind of given an eye-opening personal insight on recently is that, as someone that runs a podcast that's knee-deep in manufacturing and automation and what's working in the manufacturing world, and as someone that spent his career working at Rockwell and Anheuser-Busch, like two of the creme de la creme,
Right.
best manufacturing companies out there, very well run. Personally, I think I miss some of the realities of manufacturers sometimes. Like, I know there are a lot of folks out there that haven't automated, don't want to automate, don't know how, they're retiring, they don't know who they're going to transition their machine shop to. I will say I'm not going to call it a weakness, right? But an area of insight I've received recently is I need to do a better job of diving deep into the trenches and finding these companies that are on just a different playing field right now to truly see some of these realities. Because I know those folks are out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just
Right.
very lucky that I get to see a lot of the folks that are leveraging the technology and have come a long way with it in the meantime. So what I do to answer your question, though, I think one of the things I'm seeing a lot, and with some of the folks that I've spoken with, is there are these small mom and pop manufacturing shops that have no transition plan right now. Like, folks that are probably going to liquidate the business, or they could sell it to private equity or something like that. There are a lot of options that are on the table. And quite frankly, a lot of these leaders that are running those shops, they need to start looking at. For the audience that I speak to a lot of times, folks that are go-getters in the manufacturing industry, leaders in this space, a topic that's been coming up on the show is, what can you do to go about buying a machine shop, right? Like, there's going to become an opportunity for this next generation of people coming into the industry. Maybe it's someone that's worked at a shop for 4 or 5 years. Like, if you've got that entrepreneurial bug or that entrepreneurial tendency, there's a tremendous opportunity sitting out there right now. I think there's something like 15,000 machine shops across the US or across North America right now. And I don't know the stat of how many of those lack a transition plan. But with the technology that's come a long way that you can implement to connect some machine shops, connect your machines, add some synergies to the process, there is a tremendous opportunity right now in American manufacturing to take advantage of some of those synergies.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, there's just a whole generation that's kind of hitting that age of retirement, and like you said, don't have a plan. What is the exit plan? Is there one even?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, there's probably a lot of employees at these businesses that probably have that bug of, hey, I'd be
Mm-hmm.
interested in this, but do they have the knowledge, the resources to know, how do I go about doing this? What are my options here of buying this business, taking over this business? But I'm sure there's so many opportunities out there, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, just across the country, and that's from small mom and pops to medium-sized businesses alike.
Yeah. Yeah, we're at an inflection point in manufacturing where some folks are going to start taking advantage of these opportunities, and then other people are going to see what opportunities exist in this space, and other people will jump on board as well.
Yeah. Yep. And then kind of switching over a little bit, not necessarily pain points, but maybe what are some of the biggest trends that you've seen over the last, year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be? Obviously, we know robotics is huge, but are there other things that you're seeing when you're talking to these business owners?
Yeah, since I am pretty deep in the automation space, I will share a trend, one of the buzzy trends, and then one of the real trends. So right now we're seeing a lot of humanoid robots at trade shows and things like that, right? The quadrupeds, the robots on different feet. There are companies that are making, no pun intended, major strides in this space right now. Agility Robotics is always one of the first that comes to mind, because they're really doing like bin placing activities, like the dullest of the dull applications in warehouses and manufacturing that should be the first priority for all robots out there, right? I'm so sick and tired of seeing videos of robots cracking eggs in someone's house and making like someone breakfast, right?
Right.
That like maybe they can do that someday, but I don't care about that right now. There's a lot
Right.
of dull like jobs that involve a lot of lifting that can create back pain that robots should be doing first. So I love seeing companies like Agility Robotics taking that approach to humanoids. That's the trend. That's the buzzy thing right now. Let's talk about something manufacturers should be adopting right away in robotics, like AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, these little robots that zip around on wheels inside of manufacturing facilities. They're safe. They can sense when someone is by them and they need to stop. Those, let's remember, 10 years ago, those were like new. They were still innovating in that space. It wasn't like go time for those, but it is go time for those solutions now. Like manufacturers, like there's not like a lot of risk in adopting that right now. They have been proven out. You're seeing large enterprises using them. The way I like to approach things in manufacturing is taking a no-nonsense approach. Like we see the buzzwords, we see the buzzy things like humanoids, but while that's going on, there's a solution out there like AMRs in this case that is very well proven, that is very low risk at this stage. We've seen how it works in every application under the sun. Not every application under the sun, but you know what I mean. We've seen it work in a lot of different scenarios.
Right.
That is something that manufacturers should feel safer about adopting at this point. So, and that's the case for a lot of different solutions. I worked with Fix Software for a while, a company that Rockwell Automation bought. They created CMMS. They didn't create it, but they have a CMMS platform, computerized maintenance management. It digitizes your maintenance department, right? It moves you off of using Post-it notes saying, hey, Jim, when you get here for shift 2, go check out that wrapper on line 3 and do whatever XYZ maintenance tasks are on there. It puts it into a cloud-based platform, so that way there's a single source of truth to what preventative maintenance needs to get done, who completed what when, and you're no longer relying on Excel sheets or paper records to do that type of thing. My message to manufacturers is there is so much basic technology that's been proven out now that those are the first things that you should go after, right? We're seeing the buzzy trends, but don't let that cause you to lose sight of maybe some of the 101 type of solutions that you have yet to adopt. That's my advice to manufacturers.
Yeah. And so along the lines of software, I mean, do you see these companies, have they all, for the most part, adopted some sort of software that's kind of improving their day-to-day processes, or are there still plenty of them out there that are still kind of, like you said, I mean, they're going old school and they don't really have anything that's in place yet?
Both. I mean, a lot of the shops that I get invited into, a lot of the manufacturing facilities I get invited into, they've got their MES, they've got their ERP. I mean, things are humming along pretty well. But I know there are a lot of shops out there that do not have that yet. Otherwise, you wouldn't see companies like Fix Software continuing to grow and acquire new customers on a regular basis. So they're both across the manufacturing spectrum right now.
Yeah. And we see, with Bryzos obviously being a software in the metals industry, I I would say that your smaller kind of mom and pop fabricators are usually the first to kind of adopt because they don't really maybe have anything that's currently in place. And so this is an easy, oh, wow, this is really helping me expedite the things I'm doing on a daily basis as far as pricing and bidding and purchasing and things like that. And then your larger companies are like, we already have our software and our way of doing things. But, slowly as they're introduced to it and they get a taste of how it works, I mean, you start to see those medium-sized and even larger companies adopt it just because I think ever since COVID, you just have so many people wearing, so many different hats, and they're so strapped for time, and they're getting pulled a million different directions. And so if there's something that can just save them, it doesn't sound like much, but if it saves them 1 to 2 hours a day, that adds up, and it's a massive amount. And there's you're always gonna have the folks that think I don't need this, I can do it better. I can get a better price on my material, like all these different things. But we have so many that they value that time they're saving, the 1 to 2 hours per day. And so if they're like, hey, if I end up paying a percent or two more for material, big deal. Like I sat down and I had this material I had to purchase, and it was off my desk in a matter of 2 minutes, and I'm on to the next thing. That's worth so much to me. And our biggest struggle is really just kind of getting the word out. We're still a small company. We don't have some big sales force that's kind of going across the country and getting the word out. But little by little, and things like with this podcast, we have people reaching out to us that say, hey, I was introduced by one of your guests, or I saw an episode because you had this guest on. What do you guys do? Different things like that. But I feel like more and more that resistance to change is kind of going away, and I'm guessing that's happening in other areas as well, with different software and automation and robotics and different things like that. And it's more of, I'm not necessarily resistant to the change itself, but I'm resistant to, like, how do I do this? What are my best options? How do I implement this? Do I have the employees to implement a new software for our business, or new machinery, equipment, things like that? And I guess that's the struggle for a lot of these companies of, just how do we execute this plan?
I think tying this back to a lot of our conversation, I think we're going to see an influx of innovators entering the manufacturing industry here. There already are people doing that. And it goes back to a simple reason we talked about the young folks, right? If you look back at, finance was big in the 90s. Folks were flocking to New York City for that. Tech was big in the 2000s. People were flocking to the Bay Area for that. People will go where the money is, and people are starting to see that there's money in manufacturing. So again, as you get that next generation, and I'm not necessarily just talking in terms of age, right? You get that next generation of innovative, forward-thinking people entering the hot industry at the time. I have a sense, I'm very optimistic that manufacturing is one of those industries, if not the industry, that's going to start seeing that flood.
Yeah. It's when we're talking about the kind of the younger generation. It's funny. It reminded me of, we've had so many people that start using Bryzos, and they're on the purchasing side of things, and whether they're in estimating or procurement. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone that's younger say, "This is so amazing because I no longer have to talk to someone." Right? Like,
I don't like that part of it as much. But I understand the speed aspect
because
of it.
I come from a sales background, right? And so when someone would send me an email of, hey, I'm looking for this size, this quantity, can you send me a price? My natural reaction was I called them, right? If it was just a black and white kind of question or inquiry, sure, maybe just email them a response. But a lot of times there was a little more to the job and whatnot, and so it would warrant a phone call, or at least I thought it did. And, because that's where I felt like I brought the value of, I'm going to call this person and really try and figure out what their pain points are and come up with a solution. But more and more, I think the person on the other end of that phone call is like, I don't want you to call me. Like, don't call me. Just send me the information. And I think that's kind of what my point was, is when you're dealing with commodity type of material, they don't want that phone call. They don't need someone stopping in their shop once a week or once a month to kind of, hey, how are things going? And, I'm busy enough. So I want to purchase my material and move on to the next thing on my list.
Yeah, it's about removing friction. Like I know I kind of balked at that because I do like the social aspect of
I
B2B
know.
business, but if you can make your buying process as frictionless as possible, right? Like, I mean, think of Amazon, right? Lower the amount of clicks it takes to get from picking the product to saying, I'm going to have this delivered at my house tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Like, I think they are, regardless of what folks think of them, you can use them as an example of a company that like has one singular mission. It's like getting you whatever you need as quickly as possible at a competitive price, right? And more
Absolutely.
companies need to figure out like what is the one singular thing they're trying to do to make someone's life better and easier, and optimize how you do that every minute of the day. I shouldn't say optimize every minute of the day, but optimizing that should be your focus as a business, in addition to completing the deliveries and things like that you already have.
Right. And it's so funny you say these things. I mean, a couple things you just hit on it's kind of our North Star when we were developing our new model of Bryzos. Just that frictionless experience. And, Amazon, obviously, like you said, was one. Everything in from our UI, just the experience of getting pricing on the app, purchasing, that's what we always felt like, okay, we need to make this as frictionless as possible. How do we do that? So every decision we thought about, that was kind of front and center. And then you also touched on, companies that they start out with just kind of one thing they focus on, right? And we studied some of those companies, like DocuSign. It's a perfect example. I mean, look how big of a business that is, and like that is the one thing they do, and that's it. Now,
Just signing a piece of paper.
it
That's
is.
it.
And it's amazing, but
Yeah.
that's another thing that we focused on is because you know how it is when you're starting a business. There's just all these things that you can they grab your attention because a customer's like, oh, it'd be great if you could do this and do this, and next thing you know, scope creep comes in, and you're doing all these different things okay, but nothing great. And so when we started Bryzos, and still to this day, we've expanded a little bit, but we kind of have really stayed focused on here's what the products that we want to offer. This is the experience we want someone to have, and we really trying to stay in that lane and just make it kind of fine tune that whole process from start to finish. And someday maybe we'll start to branch out into these different areas and different things. But for now, that we can't be sidetracked with that at all. And I think it's served us well in how we've developed the software, how the feedback we get from both buyers and sellers of our product. They're just like, oh my God, this is just so amazing. It was so easy to use. And that's one thing we hang our hat on. I'll do a demo with someone, but my first response to them is, well, just try it out yourself, right? Like you should be able to sit down and use this without anyone helping you. Now, if you need some help, I'm happy to do it. But we get that feedback a lot of, there's zero learning curve involved, and that's what we wanted, that frictionless experience.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the Bryzos tie-ins as well, as we've weaved our way through this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, talking with you. Some great stories here. For those listening, if they want to connect with you or find you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. Number one, subscribe to Manufacturing Happy Hour. If you like this show, I think they'll like Manufacturing Happy Hour as well. So just search Manufacturing Happy Hour on Google or wherever you get your podcasts. Will be the first thing that comes up. And happy to connect on LinkedIn as well. My last name's a confusing German name. It's Luecke. So if you look up Chris Luecke Luecke. It's 6 letters. You should be able to come across me pretty easily.
Perfect. All right. Well, that sounds good. Thanks again. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Cheers.